Piece of that bread.
And I'm going to mute people who are talking. And I am going to spotlight me for a hot minute. Welcome, everyone. We have Reb Simcha Raphael. He's the founding director of Da'at Institute. And he has done many, many programs on death awareness education, bereavement counseling, rituals of death and mourning, and the spirituality of afterlife, near-death experiences and reincarnation. In addition, as a bereavement therapist and pastoral counselor, Dr. Simcha Raphael offers individual and family grief counseling. We are so lucky to have him today. He knows our educator, Ashley Plotnick. He knows our member, Ben Zeller. And we're just so happy to have him. So I'm going to remove my spotlight and spotlight Rabbi Dr. Raphael, and it's all yours.
Great. And I also know Ben's lovely significant other, Emily. So I'm glad to be here. I want to thank Vanessa for the opportunity to be here. And I want to thank you all for being here, because if you weren't here, I'd actually have no reason to be here. So I just want to appreciate the significance of where we are in the evolution of the Jewish people. Here I am with, what do we have? We have 52 Hollywood squares in front of me. We have never studied Torah so passionately as we've done in the past year. You know, there are people that I know who are amusing themselves when they're on their own by taking multiple classes every day or every week. And so I've been traveling around, I've been teaching about afterlife, but I haven't had as many opportunities to be in so many different cities without ever leaving the comfort of my home. So let's just acknowledge that. Okay, so I'm going to talk about exploring Jewish views of the afterlife and some of the practical implications, how it helps us think about dealing with the reality of dying and death. Speaking of which, I often say I hope that you never get to use anything I've taught you. But unfortunately, death being what it is, sometimes it impacts our homes and our families rather closely, as it is for some members in this congregation here today. So I want to do a bracha for Torah study. And here's the teaching. Here's the way it goes. You know this teaching. I'll say it to you in Hebrew to impress you that I went to Hebrew school, and then I'll translate it into English. Al shlosha dvarim ha'olam omed, ala Torah, ala avodah, v'al gemilut chasadim. The world stands on three things. Torah, right? Our study of Torah. Avodah, what's avodah? Service, right? Spiritual service. It's work, but it's often sort of prayer. And gemilut chasadim.
Good deeds, charitable deeds.
And also committees,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because that's how we do our Gemilut Chasadim, through committees. And so that's the thrust of Jewish life, in that we learn, we pray, and we do things to make the world a better place. But also we can use that to use that teaching to understand the connection between the world of the living and the world beyond in the following way. And I'll do it in reverse order. Gemilut Chasadim. What are some of the things that we do at the time of a yortzeit? What do we do at a yortzeit?
Prayer.
Prayer. What else?
Comfort.
Light a candle.
We light a candle. Okay. There's still more.
Praise God.
Honor the person.
How do we honor the person?
Kaddish.
Praise God. Saying Kaddish.
We say a Kaddish. There's one more thing that you haven't caught on, and I want to make sure your executive director or someone knows this. You give tzedakah.
Charity.
Okay, why do you give charity?
But also, you remember the individual who died.
And so you get a tax receipt also. Why else do we do that?
You play it forward as well.
Okay, and In the traditional understanding, our giving tzedakah on behalf of somebody who dies has a beneficent effect on the state of their soul in the afterlife. We give tzedakah as a redemptive process. They didn't teach you that necessarily in Hebrew school, but that's the traditional understanding. Same thing with prayer. When we say Kaddish, on one hand, it's an effective bereavement ritual, but at the same time, the traditional view is that our saying Kaddish on behalf of somebody who has died helps their soul be purified or transformed. And similarly with Torah, we can dedicate the merit of our study of Torah for the zchut, for the karmic record, if you will, for the merit of one who has died. So I want to ask, first of all, I want to ask each of you to think about, who's on your list that you want to dedicate this learning to. And I want to ask Ashley to tell us the name of your grandmother, because we particularly want to highlight her soul today.
Gittel Bat Malka V'chaim Gloria Gershkov.
And also my mother-in-law, we just passed the Shloshim. She was Nechama Leah Bat Chaim Ve'elka. So to those souls named and all those in your mind and in your heart, may the merit of our learning be for the zchut, be for the sake of the evolution of your soul. And I want you to, hang on, I want you to join me in a minute. This is what we're talking about. We're talking about exploring Jewish views of the afterlife. And here's the bracha for Torah study. So unmute yourself and let's hear a wonderful cacophony of sounds as we say this together on 3. 1, 2, 3. Amen. Holy One of blessing, majesty of all time and space, thank you for this opportunity to soak in these holy words of Torah, which is not quite a literal translation, but it works. Okay, so I want to tell you a story. I want to tell you a story about how I got to do this work talking about Jewish views of the afterlife. I used to be young and foolish. Now I'm just foolish, but this was sometime in my early 20s. I had a buddy. We were friends in high school. We were friends in college. And now that you've seen the picture, I can come off the screen for a second. And it was a Saturday night, and I was cooking a meal for, I had a date coming over. I was one of these sort of hip Jewish guys who would, cook a meal for my date, right? And my friend was helping me cook the meal. And then he was from an Orthodox Jewish family. So every Saturday night he would go visit his father. So he started to say, goodbye, I'm going to visit my father. Shabbos is over. The date turned out to be okay. The meal turned out to be okay. And we went out after. I was on the streets of Montreal at 2:00 in the morning. And I walked out of a cafe and I pointed to the full moon. I have to check the calendar. I think it might have even been the 2 spot. And I said, there's something very auspicious about that moon. I don't know what it is, but there's something very auspicious about it. I took her home. I went to sleep. And at 5:00 in the morning, the phone rings. And it's another friend of mine telling me the friend I had just been with earlier that evening had just been killed in a car accident like that. Yeah, can you imagine how I felt? Right. I mean, I was 22 years old. The world was in front of me. And all of a sudden I was making plans to go visit, to go bury a friend. And very early on, I felt a sense of his presence. The name of the funeral home, the sign said, the name of the cemetery said Mount Pleasant Memorial Park. There was nothing pleasant about burying a 22-year-old guy in the dead of a Montreal winter. Not much better than a Chicago winter. But at the cemetery, I felt his presence. During the Shiva, there was a few of us were sitting around saying, didn't it feel like he was in a room? I went back to the house where we had cooked the meal and there were leftovers. And I thought, oh, is his energy still in the food? And when I began to ask what Judaism had to say about life after death, nobody had a satisfactory answer for me. There was this embarrassment or this discomfort about talking about it. And I had a degree in religious studies. I knew the Hindus believed in life, and the Buddhists did, and Christianity, there was never any question. So what do Jews believe in afterlife? I asked, and in essence, I ended up writing the book I would have wanted to read when I was 21, 22, and my closest friend was killed in a car accident. And then my first job after I graduated, I did my PhD. My first job was a resident psychologist in a Jewish funeral home. So I all of a sudden had to see if I could put some of this stuff together in practical ways. So I have the mic, so I get to ask the first question, okay? What did you learn what Judaism has to say about life after death? Do me a favor. Okay, so Phyllis is I'm gonna hear from Phyllis, but look at the screen first and see all of these confused looks on your face, as if I asked you, like, tell me the molecular structure of the universe. Phyllis, what's the answer to my question?
We learn that God keeps faith with those in the dirt. We say that in every service.
Okay, so right, and then he keeps saying also by bringing people back up to life. We had this whole thing about return to Machaya Metim, return, the resurrection of the dead. But what happens to Joe and Jane Jew after they die? We don't have so much information. Somebody put in the chat something with all souls return to God. What else? Look again. Look at it. Look, I'm scrolling through all the screens here. Look at all these confused looks on your face. I mean, I see some of you lived too long to die young. Some of you did, not all of you. So, and you'd think if I had my Catholic students here and I said, what do you learn about life after death? Everybody would put their hand up. But your silence is very, very revealing in a way. So how many of you heard something like this? I need a reader. Vanessa, will you be my reader? And then we'll ask other people to read it.
Absolutely. And what I was going to say is I think a lot of us define what we think about death, that it's not what other religions think. Well, we don't think that, and we don't think that.
Well, you already you're psychic, because read what I just have here. This is sort of the scroll, like this is the Jewish view, we've been told.
Judaism believes in life in the living, the here and now. Judaism celebrates life in the living. It dwells on life here rather than on the hereafter, as other religions and faiths do. Life is precious, the here and the now.
And here, there's another piece on this. Read that one.
Dead is dead. Right? Wait a minute here. What lives on are the children and the legacy of good works.
Okay, so I put up your hands. How many of you heard a variation on that? Okay, so this is like telling you that Santa Claus isn't real. It's true, but it's only half true. This is the bill of goods that we've got taught in the contemporary Jewish world. We don't believe in afterlife like other religions do, i.e., Christians do. We don't. Or, life is lived in the here and now. So here's the truth. The truth is, Judaism says the here and now is important. We do mitzvot in this world, and there's not a sense of, even when Mashiach comes in messianic times, it's not that we're going to go into a transcendent other world. We're going to transform this world, and we're going to become a mamlechet kohanim v'goy kadosh, a kingdom of priests and a holy nation, and we're going to build a holy life here on earth. But that doesn't mean the Jews don't believe in life after death. In the pre-modern world, in the world of your great-great-grandparents and mine, they didn't sit around saying, Vel Chaim, do you believe in afterlife? I'm not so sure. It was hardwired. Somebody was going to say something?
In the chat we have, Barbara said, I believe that the soul lives on. Bill said, death is just something we were taught not to discuss, which I hope in our school, I think we do discuss it a little bit more now with the kids. Ellen said, I learned that the dead live on in the hearts of those who remember them.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that notion that the dead lives on in our ancestors, so to speak, and in our descendants, is really German Jewish philosophy. Hermann Cohen writes that in the 1800s. He says when Jacob is gathered to his people, what that means is we live on through our descendants. In the traditional Jewish world, in the world of Isaac Bashevis Singer and the Hasidic masters, in Shalom Aleichem, there was never any question. Fiddler on the Roof is an afterlife story. Remember Fiddler on the Roof? Right? Fruma Sarah comes through from the other side. In Yiddish culture, they would say, when you go into the synagogue, knock on the door in the morning, because that's where the spirits hang out overnight. So what happened is somehow we lost touch with these teachings. I don't know, I didn't catch who said, we don't talk about death, but most of us, if you grew up at a certain state, nobody wanted to talk about death. Kids never went to funerals. My grandmother died. I don't remember a shiva. I don't remember any of that. So what happened, in a sense, what happened to me is that I had to go do archaeology when my closest friend was killed in a car accident and find the teachings that we had lost touch with. So what I'm going to share with you in the next little while is a kind of distillation of 20 years of reading everything I can get my hands on about life after death. Anyone else? Comments, questions? In a moment, I'm going to tell you a Hasidic story, and we're going to look a little bit at some teachings from the Zohar, which I'm going to talk about in a minute.
Sandy also says the play The Dybbuk deals with life after death. And Pamela says dust to dust.
Dust to dust is interesting because that could also mean dead is dead and then you're gone, like you right? And so what I want to say is we're living through a time of there's more changes with regard to dying and death than any other point in our, in recent times. We're living through a transformation of cultural attitudes towards dying and death. There's sort of the medical aid in dying, the green burial. There's more Chevra Kadisha coming back. And part of that is a reclaiming of the spirituality of dying and death. For many years, some of you probably have in your library, Maurice Lamb, The Jewish Way in Death and Dying. The funeral directors gave out that book for a whole generation, but there's very little about the spirituality, more of the halachic stuff. So I want to give you a little bit of spiritual background on some of our teachings on afterlife. Okay, another comment, question, and then I'm going to go forward and tell you a story in a minute. Okay, so let me go to this. This is where we're going to. Oh, Vanessa, we didn't do the publicity right. We didn't tell them we're going to time travel. Okay, so we're going to time travel.
They know I love a good time travel.
Yeah, I know, but I want to make sure, that I don't have anybody gets nauseous when we go into the time machine, right? So we're going to go back to the 12th to 16th century, and we're going to interview people. Can you put my PDF file of the text into the chat? Okay, so we're going to give
you. I'm going to have to put it in a couple of swipes. And if you don't get it, I'll make sure that you can email me and I'll send it out to you tomorrow.
Can you just drop the PDF into the chat?
I will try.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about Kabbalah, and I'm going to talk a little bit about, wait, I'm going in the wrong direction. We go forward in life, and I'm going to talk a little bit. Okay, this is Zohar. So here. Actually, let me go off screen for a second, folks. I need to ask you a question. I take you. What's the difference between Kabbalah and Hasidism? Anybody know? We got two professors in the house. We got a few. Okay, Dr. Zeller. Yeah, I know you studied at Temple University.
Well, I was between bites of my very late breakfast. My understanding is Kabbalism is much broader. I mean, you have Kabbalists that predate Hasidism, Kabbalists that go back to outside of the Hasidic worldview. So go back to Spain or all the way in Safat. So I think Kabbalism is a little broader, whereas Hasidism is a particular moment drawing from Kabbalism, but coming out of the particular sort of shtetl movements of, what is Hasidism, at the 17th century or so? I'm trying to remember the history, but that's my guess.
Yeah, 1760 is the Baal Shem Tov. So Kabbalah is a metaphysical movement that was interested in the mysteries of the universe, the creation of the soul, and what happens to the soul after death. And Hasidism, which is not just Jews in Borough Park selling diamonds, by the way, though sometimes we think of it that way, right? Hasidism takes the philosophy of Kabbalah and it brings it to the masses. So these are the questions of the Zohar, of what's the nature of the universe, the nature of the soul, how are souls created, and then what happens to the soul after death. And what Hasidism does is it really, it was a mass movement. The nephew of the Gerer Rebbe, one of the Hasidic dynasties, was in the Polish parliament in the year 1900, which says to me that was really a mainstream movement. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. I'm going to tell you a Hasidic story that draws from Kabbalah, and then we're going to mix it together with a little bit of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross psychology. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross started off at the University of Chicago, so we're bringing in a hometown girl, and then a little bit of Californian psychology that I bring to it, and we're going to present a kind of contemporary psychology of the afterlife journey of the soul. You with me? Okay. Any questions in the chat at this point, Vanessa? Because this is working. We'll.
It's totally working. We're good to go.
Okay. Now I have to see if I can stand up and not cut my head off, because I have to put a book underneath, because I want to tell you a story. You cannot tell a Hasidic story sitting down. Okay, I have to tell you that. So this is a story told of Reb Elimelech of Lezhensk. Reb Elimelech of Lezhensk was one of the early and great Hasidic masters. And in his lifetime, he had a friend who was a great Torah scholar. His friend came to him and said, I don't know why it is, my time to leave the world is rapidly approaching. Can you do me a favor? He says, sure, I'll do you a favor. You know, what do you need? He says, my son hasn't been educated in the ways of the Jewish people. Can you take care of my son? So Elimelech says, sure, I will, but on one condition. What do you mean on one condition? What kind of condition do you make with a guy who's dying? He says, I will take care of your son and educate him on the proviso you come back and tell me what it's like on the other side. They shake. It's a gentleman's agreement, and Reb Elimelech does everything to take care of this kid, sends him to all the great yeshivas. When he has the bar mitzvah, like there were 2 bands at the bar mitzvah. You know, I mean, he was really doing it with full integrity, even up until the time of the wedding. Because in this culture, if you're going to educate a young bucher, a young man, you're also going to make a shidduch. It was an arranged marriage. Apparently, she had a master's degree. She had been to the orthodontist. It was very, very classy. Comes time for the afternoon of the wedding. The groom's family was there. The bride's family is there. And Reb Elimelech, who was the stand-in for the groom's late father, was nowhere to be found. He was both the officiating rabbi and the stand-in for the groom's father. And the hors d'oeuvres were getting cold and the guests were getting kvetchy. It was a real mess. They wait an hour. They wait 2 hours. Finally, they send somebody to the Rebbe's study. They peek at the keyhole, and the Rebbe is meditating. Oy vey, the Rebbe's meditating. We can't even disturb him. Whatever. After 3 hours, he comes. He does the wedding. At the end of the wedding, they put down the glass. They break the glass, and they cry out. When they cry out, Mazel Tov, Mazel Tov. Rebbe Elimelech gets up at the reception to address the guests. Says, I suppose you're wondering where I was for 3 hours. Let me tell you a story. So he proceeds to tell the guests the story of the original agreement he had made with the groom's late father. And he said, here I had fulfilled my part of the bargain and he hadn't done his. So I'm sitting and I'm waiting and I hear, Elimelech, oh, Chaim, is that you? What was it like? He said, the moment of death was absolutely painless. It was like taking hair out of milk. And even if somebody had COVID-19, the moment of death was absolutely painless. It was like taking hair out of milk. And I see all the people standing around and they're crying and they're shrine. I said, stop, I'm over here. but they couldn't hear me. They couldn't see me. I figured, you know what? They'll figure it out. It's a mistake. Again, I could see the Chevra Kadisha, the burial society, preparing my body. And I said, wait, you're wasting your time. I'm over here. They didn't hear me. They didn't see me. You know what? They'll bury me. I'll come back. I'll explain it was a mistake and it'll all be okay. I follow the procession out to the cemetery and everybody leaves. And then I have to, I'm getting very furious because I have to dig out and it's starting to thunder and it's starting to lightning. And I realize there's a raging river and I have to get across the river. I have to build a raft to get across the river. And I started getting so confused. Maybe I should stay here, I think. No, go. I have to go. Do I go? Do I stay? Do I go? Do I stay? I get so confused. I cried, help. And all of a sudden I see before my eyes this great being of light. And this being of light says, don't you know you're no longer in the world of confusion? You've entered the universe of truth. And instantly I could see a panoramic vision of every single deed I've ever done in my life. And I'm to stand for judgment. And I wait as the judgment comes down. Basically, I've been a God-fearing man. Basically, I try to serve my creator. So I don't enter into Gehenna. It's purgatory. There's no eternal damnation, but there's Gehenna. But I could have more fully lived my destiny. I could have more fully served my creator. I certainly could have paid my synagogue dues on time. That's for sure. So I don't enter into the heavenly Garden of Eden. So what's going to happen to me, I ask? I'm assigned a resting place in between Gehenna and Gan Eden, in between the realm of purgatory and the heavenly realms. And there I stay. And I see, on one hand, I see the torments of Gehenna, and my soul is cleansed of further defilements. And I see the lofty heights of Gan Eden, and my soul ascends higher and higher. Now there I stay. Now it says in our tradition that on Shabbat, all souls are released from Gehenna. They say Shabbat is a taste of the world to come. The first Shabbat comes, I enter into Gan Eden. It was fantastic. It was sublime. It was blissful. It was unbelievable. It was better than Super Bowl Sunday. But Shabbos ends, and the messenger of the heavenly tribunal says, come on, you have to go back to your resting place in between Gehenna and Gan Eden. I said, stop. I don't want to go. I like it here. He said, no, you have to go. I said, you know what? You go tell the heavenly tribunal that in my lifetime, I knew Reb Elimelech and I studied Torah with him. And that should be on my merit record. The messenger goes and comes back from the heavenly tribunal and says, it's been determined on high that you shall rightfully take your place in Gan Eden eventually. But it's also known that in your lifetime, you made a promise to Reb Elimelech of Lezhensk. And until you fulfill that promise to Reb Elimelech, you can't rightfully take your place in Gan Eden. So Reb Elimelech is at the reception. He's telling this story. And he says, so I said to him, come on, let's go. You know, your son's getting married. He says, where I'm going is so blissful, so sublime. You go to that wedding and you make a l'chaim on my behalf. And when you do that, ask everybody there to tell everyone they know the story and to make a l'chaim on my behalf. And ask them to tell everyone they know the story and to make a l'chaim on my behalf and to keep telling the story. So what I want to say is l'chaim, 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 and I share with you that story exactly as it was first told to me. Now I can sit back down and say that, my friends, is a Jewish view of the afterlife. Anyone want to comment on that story? Oh, Ben, here, can you fill my cup? You're pouring coffee. Can you refill mine too? Levi, we can do that one.
For my temple dues.
Was someone saying something? So you know what? Listen, here's what I want to say. But well, we're going to unpack the story. We're going to read some text. If Joseph Campbell were here, remember Joseph Campbell used to be on late night on PBS. He would say that this is a mythic tale of the post-mortem journey. Okay. The way in which fundamentalism makes us think about heaven and hell is it's a location. But the way the Kabbalists understood it is it's a journey of the soul. And so what I'm going to do in the next little while is talk about the journey of the soul. But actually, I have something I want to do first. The way we think about afterlife depends, the way we think about life depends on what we think about afterlife. Okay? So we'll go here. If we think about afterlife or life in the materialistic sense, okay? This is Stephen Hawking over here, and he's saying consciousness is an epiphenomenon of the brain produced by the firing of neural synapses. What's his name? That psychologist, Simcha Freud. Simcha Freud says, standing beside the dead body of a loved one, human beings invented spirits and afterlife. Okay, dead is dead. So in that worldview, how do they understand afterlife?
Nothing.
How do I get out of here? Nothing. Just a second. I don't want to quit out of here. I want to. Hang on. Wait. I'm trying. You'll forgive me. I have to get back to my screen. Okay. I want to stop the screen share.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's
I'm
what
here.
you want to do.
Okay.
Okay, Wendy,
So-
did you want to say something?
No.
Okay.
In the materialist worldview, there's no such thing as afterlife. So for those of you who subscribe to that point of view, I am not selling you belief. Okay? If we're in the same room, I would sell you my book, but I'm not selling you belief. And if you need to buy the book, if you want to buy the book, you got to go to Amazon.com or to my website. Because if I say believe and you say I don't believe, then we're in an adversarial relationship. But I want you at least to understand what Judaism has to say. I think ultimately everybody has to do their own meaning making around dying and death. You know, when I was a 22-year-old kid, I found it helpful to think about what was life after death. It helped me to deal with my own loss. But we're always dealing with it, unfortunately. And looking around, I need to say this very seriously. Ain't none of us getting out of here alive. Not today. Relax, okay? I don't want to upset anybody, right? But the nature of the human condition is that mortality is built into the operating system of human beings. My Auntie Rose would say, everyone has their expiry date tattooed on their body. She says, mine's on my tush and I can't see it and I don't worry about it. To which I said, Auntie Rose, if you could see your ass from behind, you would probably drop dead. It's probably just a good thing. So in the materialistic view that most of us were raised in, there's no notion of afterlife. Or I don't know. I might have to call upon Emily here. What happened? What? Oh, here's the sheriff's. The screen sharing. Oh, my screen sharing failed to start. Try again later.
No, we could see it. We saw it.
I know it. For some reason, it came up twice. Okay, so in the traditional Christian notion, there's heaven and hell, right? So what does hell look like?
Fire and flames,
Right, and heaven?
serene souls all up, setting with Hashem.
What else?
How about some harps?
Harps. There's more. What else?
That's
Clouds.
The clouds. The clouds are because they let you smoke at the bar. That's the main thing you need to know about. Okay, that's why there's clouds. Okay, and then in the Kabbalistic view, okay, here's the Kabbalistic view. Human beings are biopsychocosmic continuum. That's the only fancy word I'm going to use today. Bio, we have bodies, right? It's 11:30 on my time. It's 12 already. You're awake. Psycho is the emotional place, and somewhere we connect to the universe. So this is the Yud Hey Vav Hey, the name of God. Usually we see it horizontally, but vertically, this is the feet, the physical realm. This is the midsection. These are the arms and the head. So we are an amalgam of body, emotion, mind, and spirit. right? You're with me? In death, all of those realms unravel like a braided Havdalah candle. So this is the triptych of the afterlife journey of the soul. You remember when you used to go to AAA and get a triptych? My kids don't even know how to read a map anymore. My charts start from the bottom. This is the rest of what we're going to do today. There's a process of separating from the physical body. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. There's a process of cleaning the emotional schmutz under the rug. There's a process of intellectual contemplation in the sense of seeing God. And there's a process of spiritual unification, of being God, of merging with God. So the afterlife, in Kabbalah, the afterlife is a journey of the transformation of body, emotion, mind, and spirit. When my son was at Indiana University, and I would drive from Bloomington to Indianapolis to the airport, there was a sign I would meet on the road. It would say, avoid hell, repent. And I would always have to pull over and check my GPS to make sure I didn't take the wrong turn. So the fundamentalists want you to think of heaven and hell in very literal terms. And we have Christian Renaissance art is hardwired into our brain. I say heaven, you think in images of Christian Renaissance art. I say hell, you don't think in terms of midrash. You think in terms of Christian Renaissance art. Well, somebody had us studying Torah and with God in heaven. That's good. That a little bit of midrash seeped in. So what we're going to do now is we're going to look at some of these texts that we're going to show different visionary phenomena, or if you will, or different images of the afterlife journey of the soul. You with me? Stop me for comments, questions. I know where I'm going. I'm taking you on a journey. Fasten your seatbelts here.
We are good. I cannot get your handout into the chat, but I can harvest everybody's email and send it out tomorrow.
Okay, and I'm gonna have everything on the text anyways. Okay. Yeah, Marilyn has a hand up, please.
Yes. In studying Torah for so many years, I know so little, but I love to keep studying. There's always, as they say, to turn it and turn it. There isn't a whole lot that I've studied and I have studied, but there's so much more in a lifetime you can never know it all in a lifetime. But I haven't read a whole lot in Torah about death, mostly life. And when an ancestor dies, perhaps they go to the next, to their kin. And yet there's one portion that always stays with me, that God blows life into your nostrils. So if God is eternal and he's life, then there's a piece of life perhaps within each one of us. And so when you die, is that little piece of life leave the body? It can't leave the body and have no existence, because if God is alive, then that piece that he blows into you, into our vessel, gives us life. And yet there.
Okay, so hang on, Marilyn. You're throwing about 6 questions at me. Let me try to do one and then keep going. Your question is, I don't see a lot in Torah. Partially, it's because of the lens through which we read Torah. Because when it says Jacob is gathered to his ancestors, gathered to his people, we don't take that we take that as that's an interesting metaphor. While they were alive, when God blows into Adam's nostril, it's nefesh chaya. He's a living being, and they say when they're dead, nefesh met. It's sort of a dead being. While you're alive, you're hanging out with the family clan. In death, you hang out with the ancestors. When Samuel dies, he goes to the underworld of Sheol, and Saul goes to the witch of Endor and brings back the spirit of Samuel from the underworld. So there's a lot in your question, and and I'm not going to get it all done now. We might have to do a 3-part series on biblical, rabbinic, and other views of the afterlife. But let's keep going on so we can go on this journey. And the answer is yes. There's a spirit of life that persists beyond death. I want to go back into the story with you. Thank you for the wonderful questions. And look, these are important questions. I got an hour, and then they're going to throw me out. So I want, they're going to pull my plug here. I want to make sure we land and not get stuck in Gehenna.
Thank you.
Go back into the story in your imagination, that scene that I enacted. Do I go? Do I stay? Do I go? Do I stay? What word would you use to describe the state of mind of the soul at that point? Somebody call it a word.
Confused.
Confused, right?
Purgatory?
It's also grasping. Do I go? Do I stay? Do I go? Right? That is understood in our tradition as conflicted, right? Chibut hakever, the pangs of the grave. It's said to be a 3 to 7 day period when the soul is, quote, potentially confused as to whether it's alive or dead. They didn't teach you this in Hebrew school, but actually let's do a text, and then we'll continue the conversation. I want somebody to read this one. Or Vanessa, you be my reader for now.
Vanessa's muted. Oh my goodness.
I'm muted. That's so unusual. Chibut hakever, pangs of the grave. Rabbi Yehuda said, for 7 days the soul goes to and fro from his house to his grave, from her grave to her house, mourning for the body.
Actually, as I'm learning from my millennial kids, the word is they. For 7 days, the soul goes to and fro from their house to their grave, from their grave to their house, mourning for the body.
Right. Well, I
They
just
never
looked up.
taught
Yeah.
us this. This is very interesting. Besides the fact that this is one of my favorite graphical images, it suggests that there's this kind of intermezzo phase in between the moment of death and beyond. And to Amy and to Ashley, I want to say, keep open the channels of your mind and your heart to your mother and your grandmother, because often the synchronicities are very significant around then. People describe moments of somehow something almost magical happening and feeling a sense of connection. It's not guaranteed to happen, but at least to know that our tradition suggests that there is this kind of it's almost like what the Catholics call it, limbo, right? The Buddhists talk about a bardo state. This stuff that appears cross-culturally, but it's almost as if it takes a little while for the being to continue on its journey, which is interesting. What does it correspond with? If I say for 3 to 7 days, the soul goes to and fro from the grave to their home, mourning for the body. What does it correspond with?
Shiva.
Well, that's interesting. Right? Which means that Shiva, besides being, wow, that was a fantastic Shiva. Who catered that? It's also a soul guiding ritual. One of my colleagues drew this image here of the Shiva home and the grave, so the soul goes back and forth. But it's the sense that there's some possibility of connection. What do you do? What do you do at the end of Shiva?
Walk around the block.
You walk. Well, why do you walk around the block?
Not sure.
You're not sure? Well, you're walking because you need some exercise because you've been sitting eating for 7 days. Why else do you walk around the block?
Kind of a full
Okay.
circle, if there isn't a circle, but that's as close as we can get maybe to a full circle.
Well, actually, we get the circle with today they serve you bagels. It's supposed to be lentils and hard-boiled eggs in the traditional meal. On psychologically, it's saying I've taken this time out of time and now I'm going to go back into life. But in a spiritual sense, it's as if it's saying to the soul, we can walk you this far, and now you have to go the rest of the way on your own. when my wife's father died, it was Parshat Vayechi. It was the Parsha of Jacob's death. And she said, the Torah says this week that Jacob was gathered to his ancestors. So who are the ancestors to whom my father has been gathered? And we named some of our friends that we had lost and some of his relatives. And then we walked her around the block as if she was escorting her father on the journey to meet up with the ancestors. Or, these days we're doing this on Zoom. So listen, I want to say this to Amy and to Ashley, because I imagine you'll be doing some Zoom Shiva. So the last morning of Shiva, I mean, the name of the article I want to write about the Shiva for my mother-in-law was called 2 People in the Shiva House and 500 People in the Zoom Rooms. Because there were that many people who showed up over the course of the week. But there was just my wife and I, because she had been with her mother who had COVID, and so her brothers didn't even want to sit Shiva with her because they didn't until she had gotten her test results back, right? So she did a minyan on the last morning with her women friends, and then she called onto Zoom on her iPhone, and she walked around the block with her iPhone while they were singing to her. To me, that's sort of characteristic of what we're doing these days. I'll tell you about my book later, Jewish End of Life Care in a Virtual Age, newly created. But so we're doing our Zoom Shivas in a very different kind of way. So that's something that you can think about. Okay, so we're just in the early phases of the journey. I'm continuing on the triptych, but in the early phases, there are a number of what I call deathbed visions. Okay, if you're familiar with near-death experiences, this was Life After Life. Raymond Moody wrote this, and Ibn Alexander had Proof of Heaven. There are ancestral guides. They're familial, they're family members, they're mythic guides, and there's a life review. So I need another reader here. Whoops, no, we went the wrong way. Okay.
I'll read it.
Please.
Rabbi Shimon said, have you seen today the image of your father or your mother? For so we have learned that at the hour of a person's departure from the world, their father or mother and other relatives gather around, and they see them and recognize them, and likewise all with whom they had associated in this world, and they accompany their soul to the place where it is to abide.
Wow. Anybody want to comment on that? That's the stuff that appears 100% in near-death experience literature. Today, there is more resuscitation technology than at any other point in human history. But how they knew that in 12th century Guadalajara, Spain, I'm not sure. But today, the hospice nurses are reporting very, very frequently a sense of somehow somebody sort of recognizing that they could see a deceased family member. I had somebody I worked with many years ago. She said she was sitting at her mother's bed. Her mother was at the end of her life, and her mother looks up and sees a vision of her own mother and says, "Oh, Mom, I never introduced you to my daughter." So the dying woman has a vision of her deceased mother who she's introducing to her daughter. I don't know exactly how these happen, but it's reported cross-culturally. Anybody have a story they want to add into this conversation? Because I think what it says is the fear often is, oh my God, somebody's going to be alone. What I say is, don't worry. There are angelic presences and guides to help people make the transition out of here. So there seem to be 2 different kinds of guides. So one I call the mommy, daddy, bubby, zadie level, the familial beings like this image here. But then there's the mythic guides. So somebody read this one. Let me move.
You want me to keep going?
Yeah, please.
Okay. No person dies before seeing the Shekhinah, and because of its deep yearning for the Shekhinah, the soul departs in order to see her. And with the Shekhinah, there come 3 ministering angels to receive the soul of the righteous. When one departs this world, they see many strange things on their way and meet Adam, the first human, sitting at the gates of Gan Eden, ready to welcome all who have observed the commands of their master.
Okay, so what you have here are two different kinds of visionary phenomena. One, like I said, the one sees one's parents or other loved ones, and also in the near-death experience literature, the Christians will see Jesus or Mary. We don't have a good iconography because of the Jewish prohibition on images. Like if we say Adam, if I say one sees the Buddha, you get an image of the Buddha. If I say Adam, we don't have a lot of that in our art. And the Shekhinah, Ashley, I need to tell you this. Modern Jewish feminism notwithstanding, the Shekhinah is not a woman with tallis and Birkenstocks. That's, though if you look at www.shekhinah.com, you'll see that on my wife's website. But in rabbinic tradition, the Shekhinah is sort of like a luminescent presence. They say in the world to come, we'll sit with the crowns of Shekhinah on our head. So here's how it is. The Christians see Jesus or Mary, the Hindus see Krishna, the Buddhists see the Buddha, and Muslims see Muhammad, and the Jews see someone from the Federation. We see.
All right. We do have some other in the chat. My father-in-law reconciled with his father upon his deathbed. Marty, who just lost his wife, says, check out the book, Final Gifts by Two Hospice Nurses. And Rabbi Serrata, one of the privileges of being a rabbi is becoming the repository of so many stories that go beyond explanation. And Lee Rivlin has a quick story. And I'm going to keep you to quickly. You can
Okay. My aunt passed away at age 99. And I was at her apartment with her children, grandchildren, and by this point in her life, she had infant and toddler great-grandchildren. But the great-grandchildren were all named after relatives, close relatives of hers who had passed away. So in her final day, they had all the babies, the toddlers, they had them all on the bed just to be close to her, and she was talking to them. And my cousins all had the same sense that they weren't quite sure if she was talking to, they weren't quite sure who she was talking to, if she was talking to the babies or if she was talking to her sister, her brother, her father. And they all sort of had that same sense. It was very interesting.
Yeah. Well, you see, look, I don't know exactly how these things happen, but I think what we have been bereft of a philosophy of afterlife, and when those kind of moments happen, or other kinds of, we don't have to go to Shirley MacLaine or the Buddhists to be able to recognize that we have teachings in our own tradition. Here's another one of these sort of magical guide stories. I had an uncle who was of the vintage that he ran away from the Tsar's army and he came to America. He actually came to Canada, and he worked hard like many of the immigrants of his generation. He worked 20 hours a day. He made his fortune. He was rabidly anti-religious. One time I wanted to make Havdalah. I lit a Havdalah candle in his house, and he goes, "I don't believe." And he was literally, "Okay, I'll put out the candle. Relax." Like he was literally going to throw me out of there. Another time he said to me, "I nearly died, and Rabban Gamliel came and said, 'Yoine, it's not your time.'" He was our uncle Yonis. Yoinale was his name, John. And who shows up for him? I nearly died. He had a near-death experience. And who shows up for him is Rabban Gamliel from his Talmudic youth in a yeshiva in Europe. And this was not an educated man who would have read Moody's near-death experience. This was not, he wouldn't have even gone to see, remember the first movie on near-death experiences was Warren Beatty and Heaven Can Wait. And, and then there was Ghosts and Flatliners, and there was a whole bunch. but Rabban Gamliel shows up for him and says that Yoini, it's not your time. So what that suggests to me is in Jungian language, there might be an archetype, there might be sort of some kind of helper being, and then it gets painted in different cultural images. So the Buddhist will see the Buddha Haruka, and the Christians will see Jesus or Mary. You know who the kids are seeing today in near-death experiences? You know what they report? They're seeing Yoda. Because Yoda is sort of like an interdimensional traveler. So I don't know, again, I don't know exactly how this works, but I think the take home that we want to have when we're companioning people and dealing with dying and death is to know that you're not going to be alone, that there are people around on the other side to be able to help you out. Comments, questions? We're going to go, we got some more texts. Anything else in the chat?
We do have something about reincarnation. What is the Jewish view of reincarnation?
The Jewish view of reincarnation is, so save that question for a little further down along the journey. I'm definitely going to get to it, at least in short term. Okay, so here's another one. You're still my reader, so go for it, or whoever it is.
When God desires to take back a person's spirit, all the days they have lived in this world pass in review.
Okay, so again, this is the life review. We have that in our culture. You saw the very panoramic vision of every single deed, every single mitzvah I've ever done in my life. And I have seen, working in hospice, my working hypothesis is that when people are dying slowly, the black box recorder goes on auto replay before they die. People seem to be, Mrs. Schwartz is in a regress state. She's not in a regress state. She's reliving the early years of her childhood. So I think the practical action directive of this, if Judaism believes in life and the living, how do we take our teachings on afterlife and make them practical? We need people to tell their stories. You know, I say to my undergraduate students, I teach an undergraduate death and dying course. I say, go take your camera, your iPhone, and sit down with your grandparents and get them to tell their story. For those of you who you know, like as I see those of you who live too long to die young, right? You want to share your legacy. Find the way. You know, if you're a writer, write your story. If you're not a writer, ask somebody to record you. I have 8 hours of each of my parents telling their stories, and it was very, very meaningful for me. So the work of the end of life harvest is of passing on the legacy. We have a whole tradition around ethical wills. Vanessa, if you want, I have a colleague who does classes on ethical wills. You know, send me an email. I'll send you his contact. And I think that's sort of the practical implications of all that. So the journey continues. Eventually, we finish with this process here. This is the chibuta kever, the leaving go of attachments to the physical body, the deathbed visions, the ancestral guides, the mythic beings, and then another realm opens up, known as Gehenna. I want to say something about Gehenna in the following way. I want to introduce it. You know, imagine
we also had a question about Sheol. I don't know if you want to.
Sheol was an earlier version of Gehenna. In biblical, okay, so that's a good intro. In biblical times, there's an underworld of Sheol, and at first, Sheol is neither good nor bad. Samuel goes to Sheol. Jacob says, if anything happens to Benjamin, I will surely go to Sheol. It's simply the underworld of Sheol. Later, it becomes a realm of torment. And then in rabbinic times, they picked up Sheol and they changed it to Gehenna. So that's what I'm going to talk about Gehenna. And again, it's a longer conversation. I have a whole chapter on biblical views of the afterlife in my book, Jewish Views of the Afterlife. So here's what I want us to understand Gehenna in the following way. Imagine, you know, you got a friend named Joe, and one day your friend Joe comes up and, you know, and he kicks you in the shins, he smacks you across the face, he spits in your face. and you're so furious with him. And I come up to you 6 months later and I say, whatever happened to you and Joe? And you say, Joe, did I ever tell you what happened to Joe? What's my point? Emotions persist long after the initial point of contact. And we human beings are very good at shoveling the SH under the rug. So you can have a fight with your significant other, and then later in the day, you all of a sudden you get a low backache because you feel unsupported, or you get a pain in the neck because they're a pain in the neck, or you get nauseous because you can't stomach anymore, or Louise Hay, who does mind body healing, says you get a bladder infection because you're pissed off, right? We know that we human beings hold emotion in our body. If you did an x-ray of me, you'd see my bone structure. If you did an MRI, you'd see the tissue structure. Imagine we could do emotiograms. So here in the jaw is where we hold our anger, and here in the chest is where we hold our grief, and we hold our shame in the midsection. We have all different layers of emotional baggage that we carry in the body. And some people who do emotional body work could tell you exactly how and what you're holding in the body. It may be, so in death, we can shove a lot of stuff underneath the rug. It may be that while we're alive, we can shove stuff under the rug. It may be in death, we have to process the unresolved psycho-emotional stuff of life. It seems to be, as I understand Gehenna, it's a period of time of processing certain kinds of emotional residue in life. It's not like, oh, I was mean to the lady at Walmart, but rather these were the deeper values I held and I failed to live up to them. These are the relationships where I have disappointment and I have to work some of that out. So our rabbi said, there's no soul that enters into Gehenna unless you have for at least 30 days. That's the shloshim. We all have a little bit of schmutz we have to clear out, but some people have more time. They need to work stuff out. So I want to ask. I want to give this to my friend Ben. You give me a little Shakespearean reading of Gehenna text. This is the Jewish Dante material.
All right.
Okay, this is. Give me a little schmaltz on it.
All right, Gehenna, purification and purgation. Gehenna, purgation. There are 5 kinds of punishments in Gehenna, and Isaiah saw them all. He entered the second compartment, and he saw 2 men hanging by their tongues. And he said, "Oh, you who unveils the hidden, reveal to me the secret of this." He answered, "These are the men who slandered. Therefore, they are thus punished." He entered the third compartment and he saw there men hanging by their organs. He said, "Oh, you who unveils the hidden, reveal to me the secret of this." And he answered, "These are the men who neglected their own wives and committed adultery with the daughters of Israel."
You're hired. That's great reading. Okay, so first of all, if you have a great Uncle Lou who is in hospice, don't go read him this text. Okay, but it works very good for educational or pedagogical purposes. First of all, this is a genre of literature called midah keneged midah. Sort of the punishment fits the crime. So you sin by the tongue, you hang by the tongue. You sin by your organs, you hang. Okay, now it's not literal. Teachings on heaven and hell in religious literature are symbolic of states of mind. Teachings on heaven and hell are symbolic of states of mind, or for the professors in the house, eschatology equals psychology, Reb Zalman used to say. Okay, so here's what it is. In the 12-step program, they talk about a fearless moral inventory. The fearless moral inventory is when you look at yourself in the mirror, unadorned and undefensive, and you have to deal with the way you acted in your life. So what would it be to have sort of a post-mortem fearless moral inventory where you look in the mirror and you see all the times that you shot from the lip and you were verbally abusive to people that you loved? It might feel like hanging from the tongue. What would it be to look in the mirror and see all the times that you acted with impropriety in your intimate relationships and you hurt someone you loved? It might feel like hanging from. So suddenly what we have here in Gehenna is not the penal colony, okay? The old metaphors are definitely medieval torture. And I know what medieval torture looks like because I raised two kids in the same household. I saw what the older one did to the younger one, okay? But the new metaphor of understanding Gehenna is rehab. So people go into rehab and they have to look at their lives, and sometimes it hurts like hell. So we seem to have in our tradition a kind of cleansing process. I heard some Kabadnik talk about it. You go to the dry cleaners, right? It's a certain period of time where, you have to clean up some of the schmutz. And we don't have eternal damnation in Judaism. And interestingly, the maximum length of time in Gehenna is 12 months. How long do we say Kaddish?
Depends on who you're saying Kaddish for. Parents, 11 months?
11 months.
11. Okay, so if there's a maximum 12 months, if there's a maximum 12 months in Gehenna, how come you only say Kaddish for 11 months?
So supposedly they don't need a full 12 months, something short of.
You wouldn't want to think that your parents got the maximum length of time in Gehenna, right? I know, but sometimes I've had people come to me and say, you know what, my parents should get 24 to 36 months. Now, interestingly enough, this description of Gehenna corresponds with the Kaddish. Now, there's a teaching that says our saying Kaddish for somebody who has died helps redeem their soul from Gehenna. It's based upon a midrash where Rabbi Akiva meets this lost soul and he says, what's wrong? He said, my son never learned how to say Kaddish. So Rabbi Akiva finds the son and he teaches him how to say Kaddish, and then he's able to help redeem the soul from Gehenna. So I want to say for us contemporaries, what does that mean for us that our saying Kaddish redeems a soul from Gehenna? Okay, well, good. I asked the question, so I get to try to answer it. So this is, let me see if I can, I got to figure out, this is my Kaddish Gehenna rap, okay? It's the first day. I'm going to do this as a conversation between a son and a father who has died. But you can think of it anyway. It's the first day. The guy shows up in the synagogue and he goes, you SOB, you didn't leave a life insurance policy. You liked your work more than your kids. And now I have to say these stupid words that don't say anything about death. And the soul on the other side says, and you were a pain that took us to raise. We're always so busy with your friends. You never had time for your family. You didn't make my life easy. It's 2 months. It's 3 months. You know what, today, I realized I didn't know you. I had no idea who you were. And the response comes back from the other side and says, I didn't know me either. What did I know? They told me how to make a living. They told, I was 21 when I got married. I was 23 when I had my kids. What did I know? I've had a couple of months since I've died here to think about it. Then I realized, I didn't really know who I was. It's 5 months, 6 months. It's not exactly a fine timeline, but it's a process. You know what, that today, I just think I never heard you say I love you. We never said that in a family. And the response comes back and says, yes, I love you. And I never heard it myself. And I'm sorry. I'm beginning to have a lot of regrets for what I didn't do, for what I did and for what I didn't do. 8 months, 9 months, today, Daddy, I miss you. I just really, really miss you today. I really, really miss you. And the response comes back and says, look, I missed you. I made a lot of mistakes and I hope somehow you'll find a way to forgive me. And it's the last day of St. Kaddish, and and we need a better ritual for that. But it's the last day of St. Kaddish. Today I just want to say I love you and I forgive you. And the response comes back and says, look, take what I gave you that was good and let go of the rest of it. And I bless you on your journey. and the year of St. Kaddish is over. And is that redeeming souls from Gehenna? I don't know, but it sure as hell makes sense to me. And I think the take home on this, and you know, I'm not so interested in the philosophical as much as I am in the pastoral and the practical. I think the implications of this is to know that between this world and the world beyond, there continues to remain a sense of connection. What's the conversation in your heart and your mind with loved ones? Because I think that's what the afterlife stuff helps us realize. I don't know exactly how it happens. I mean, I'm not saying go dial 1-900-psychic, though I think that everybody needs a good psychic, but I'm saying that there are ways in which our tradition helps us understand that there is still some connection of the mind and heart between those of us who have lived and our loved ones who have passed on. I had somebody I worked with for a time whose father was a raging drunk, and we did some work on it. And then one day he appeared to her in a dream. And Judaism says the dead appear to us in dreams, so watch your dreams. And he said, "I'm sorry," and that was very redemptive for her. So know that. You know, I tell my kids that I'm an inherently flawed man who tries to do better every day. With my luck, they'll just remember the first part, but that's a different topic of conversation, right? But I think Judaism says our work is to always do tshuva. You know, like every week we have a chance to do tshuva on Shabbat. Every year we have a chance to do tshuva. The rabbi said, avoid Gehenna by doing mitzvot, by visiting the sick, by giving money to tzedakah. We always have the opportunity to do that. And sometimes we might need a little bit of extra time after it's all over to clean up the schmutz under the rug. I promise I wasn't going to get stuck in Gehenna, or I'll never get invited back to Chicago. And so which in the winter could be like Gehenna, but that's a different conversation too. Anyone comments, questions? Because we're going to go back to the triptych and we're going to go to the next event. Can I recommend any books besides Jewish Views of the Afterlife and the Afterlife Journey and the Afterlife and the Grief Journey? Well, I didn't see the whole question from William. Can you read that?
Can you recommend any books or source materials that discuss Judaism and reincarnation? And the next one, what is the thought in Judaism if no one is named after the dead? So I can answer, Bill. I put the rabbi's website in the chat. Go to that website. You can get his books, and I'm sure they'll be in our library. If they're not in our library, they'll be there soon.
There's a guy named Yonason Gershon, who has a couple of books on cycled souls after the Holocaust. And Eli Spitz, I'm trying to remember what his book is about the soul. If you do, these days you don't even have to go to the library. You can go to Reb Google. Ask Reb Google, Judaism and Reincarnation, and you'll find a lot of stuff. And actually, in my third edition of Jewish Views of the Afterlife, I quadrupled the amount of material I had on reincarnation, because that's one of the conversations I get. I'm going to end with a reincarnation text, and we'll keep the conversation going. Okay, so I appreciate these questions, and the journey continues. Okay, so here we're back to the triptych. Eventually this period works itself out, and this is a much more psychological down here. The rabbis actually said 3 times as much as about Gehenna than they did about Gan Eden. So I'm being consistent with the rabbinic tradition, because they use Gehenna as sort of the carrot and the stick. Avoid Gehenna, do mitzvahs. The rabbis were predominantly ethicists. They wanted people to live a moral, ethical life more than they were metaphysicians. So then another realm called Gan Eden emerges, and some of the texts are like the heavenly stuff. So here's what you need to know. There were 7 realms of Gan Eden. 7 realms of Gan Eden. And so we merit a Gan Eden according to our own spiritual development. So how much money have you put into your Gan Eden account? Are you going to have a Motel 6 or a Quality Inn? Or if you're a shtickle Kabbalist, you get a Best Western? Or a fancy Hilton hotel, or an apartment on the French Riviera. So here's the here's the Gan Eden text. I need another reader. Someone?
Gan Eden has 2 gates of carbuncle, and 60 myriads of ministering angels keep watch. Each of these angels shine like the radiance of the heavens. When the righteous person approaches, angels remove from him the clothes in which he had been buried and clothe him with 8 robes of the clouds of glory and place upon his head 2 crowns, and one of precious stones and pearls and the other of gold. And they place 8 myrtles in his hand and praise him. And they lead him, they lead them to a place full of waters surrounded by 800 species of roses and myrtles. And that's Masachet Gan Eden.
There's a whole bunch of these Gan Eden texts and Gehenna texts, and that very much. So I think the important piece here is this notion that the angelic presences remove our terrestrial garments and put on our celestial garments. And our garments are made of our deeds. So again, the notion is the more we do heavenly deeds, the more the sort of the fancier garments. Is your stuff from J.C. Penney's, or is it from Macy's, or is it going to be from some other fancy store that has since gone out of business? So again, it's the connection between our action and the way we live our life determines it. Now, I accidentally opened up the wrong program. Let me go back to my screen share. I correlated the Gan Eden material with the Yortzeit, because Isaac Luria says that when we recite the Kaddish at the time of the Yortzeit, it elevates the soul every year in Gan Eden. There's the Hasidim say on a Yortzeit, the neshama zal haben an aliyah, the soul should ascend higher and higher, so that there's a connection between Yortzeit, the anniversary of a death, and Gan Eden. And I also think the Yortzeit is almost like a window when the soul peeks through. I remember one point in time I was saying Kaddish for my father, and his birthday and the last day I was saying Kaddish corresponded. And I got out of my van. When I was a kid, when I was a kid and I would go out on a date, my father would, he'd fold up a $5 bill like this and sort of slip me 5 on my way out the door. And so I got out of my van in front of Starbucks, and there was a $10 bill sitting on the ground, folded up in 4. So I figured I got a raise. I mean, but it felt like the world's opened up. And a number of years later, I was lecturing in Ohio, and I told this story, and the next morning somebody came in and said, your father was around. I found the $10 bill in the parking lot. So I don't know how that happened. Somebody I know, they went to the Jersey Shore on their mother's Yortzeit, and they found this most beautiful shell, and their mother had been a beach person. So know that sometimes the windows open up on the Yortzeit. Okay, I promised I wasn't going to leave you in Gehenna. I want to sort of take you through the last phase. The rabbis did not have to standardize belief. Okay, so there's a lot of diversity of belief. In some cases, Gan Eden is the end of the journey. The rabbis had to standardize practice, so they knew that if you were in the Jewish communities in Babylonia or in Palestine, and then later in the south of Spain, you were lighting Shabbos candles relative to the setting of the sun, or you were reading the book of Esther relative to the lunar cycle, reading the Megillah. But if you believed Gehenna looked like this, and you believed that Gan Eden looked like that, and there were differences, it didn't matter. So in some cases, there's a 4th realm of the journey, and it's known as Tzror HaChaim, the bond of life, or the bundle of life. And that's said to be a holding tank for souls underneath the throne of God. I'm going to read this. This is very it's very metaphysical. I'm not sure what it means. That holy celestial abode called the bundle of the living, where the holy superior grade called the super soul regales itself with supernal delights. You know, I'm much better on the pastoral psychological stuff, but it's like returning back to the source of the universe. And interestingly, it corresponds with the Yisker. Now I make that correspondence because, you know, like there's stories of a woman coming in to saying Yisker for her mother and saying, "Ma, help me have a child." And then a year later, and the child is born, it looks like the deceased mother. So we have this notion of beings coming around and being able to be intercessors. We have this whole tradition of this is someone at the grave of Isaac Luria. This is somebody at the grave of Rebbe Nachman. People go to Rachel's tomb. We have this whole sense. The Lubavitcher Rebbe gets all of these little kvitlach for people to be able to ask for them to intervene in our lives. And again, I'd go back to where I started. Fiddler on the Roof. You know, the women, their specialty were children and marriages. So we have this whole notion of intercessory prayer available. So in the early phases, we are helping the deceased leave go of their attachments. Later, they become available to us as a kind of visionary angelic presences or guides. So here's what I want to say as we well, actually no. So well, let me do this one text and then I'll go back to the no, I want to say something and then I want to do one reincarnation text. To do a longer thing on reincarnation, you'll have to invite me back altogether. But the notion is that eventually souls reincarnate. And why do they reincarnate? To continue to do mitzvot. Okay, somebody, Vanessa, you've been my reader. You want to read this one?
Gilgul, reincarnation for the sake of fulfilling mitzvot. Rabbi Shimon said to them, friends, students, disciples, the time has come to reveal some mysteries concerning transmigration of souls. This applies when the soul is required to reincarnate, either because of sins or because it had not completely fulfilled obligations in Torah and mitzvot while alive in this world. It is forced to come back to the world and don a body that is to be born again and finish what was imposed on it for the 70 years of the life in this world.
So I want to say from the 14th century onwards, reincarnation, Gilgul, is as kosher in Judaism as Manischewitz wine and Mogen David. We lost touch with it, but sometimes one reincarnates to continue to fulfill mitzvot or to be purified for sins, or we have this notion like the Buddhist notion of the bodhisattva, one reincarnates in order to sort of help others in lifetime. So here's the summary that I want to put on this whole conversation here. This is a whole other way of thinking about dying and death. Birth through to death is only one half of the cycle of existence. The other half is from death through to rebirth. So in life, in embodied life, we have youth, maturity, and old age, though we know that some people die before they reach old age, and some people reach old age and they bypass maturity. And then we have this process going from death through to rebirth. That are the deathbed visions that we talked about, the life review, the familial beings, the mythic guide, the beings of light, which is a separating of consciousness from the body. The emotional purgation of Gehenna is cleaning the schmutz under the rug. The heavenly bliss is of seeing your divine reward, returning back to the source of life, Tzur HaChaim, and then there are texts, we didn't do any, in womb, preparing to be reborn. So here, if you don't remember anything, but you get this one, this is the summary on this. Between this world and the world beyond is a window and not a wall. our Western materialistic science says between this world and the world beyond is a wall. Dead is dead. But in Kabbalah and in our Jewish mystical traditions and throughout Judaism, we understand that death is a transition to the world beyond, or to Olam HaNeshamot, and beyond this world, and between this world and the world beyond is a window and not a wall. And so in our prayers, in our dreams, in our silent moments of meditation, we feel the opportunity of the window that opens and allows us to invite those other beings to come and to be with us. So one last thing, this program is brought to you by, and here is my most recent book, Jewish End of Life Care in a Virtual Age, Our Traditions Reimagined. It just came out a month ago. But all that being said, I am grateful for the opportunity to be here. I thank you for your comments, for your questions, and for the invitation to be here. We still got a few minutes for a couple of comments, questions.
So, Barbara, you'll need to unmute. And it was fantastic this morning. We've gotten a lot of comments, and you'll be hearing from me this week about the reincarnation session for next year, because
Right.
we're going to be hot, hot, hot. Okay, Barbara, go ahead.
I'm curious if this reincarnation or coming back is a choice of the soul. Does everybody have to go through this, or is it something that
Good question.
is just a choice?
Okay, so now let me give you a good critique of my whole presentation. I see Ben and Emily over there, so I'll ask for a theological critique of my presentation. You didn't hear me talk about God at all. I'm sort of more of a panentheist, so I didn't speak of it in theological language, but all of this is against the background, not of our own sort of karmic judgment, but really of God's divine judgment. So in some sense, it's sort of in a theological sense, it's left up to God. In another sense, it's sort of like it depends on what our karmic merit is. So the rabbis actually discussed whether one has to spend more time in Gehenna or whether one has to reincarnate. And when reincarnation comes along, it sort of competes with Gehenna. So the most honest thing I can say is, I don't know. I'm much more interested in the reality of living life, dealing with dying and death, than what's going to happen at the end of time in history. My sense is I'd like to clean up as much schmutz as I can while I'm alive, and in some sense one can merge with Gufa de Malka, the body of the king. That's sort of the language. But in other ways, one, if you cleaned up all that, you come back as sort of there's neshama klaliot, to be like a collective soul. So Rebbe Nachman, like some of the Rebbes would reincarnate even though they had no more karma to do, because they were there to help other beings. So it's sort of like the Jewish equivalent. So I don't remember since the last time around.
Yeah.
And we had one more question in the chat. What is the thought in Judaism if no one is named after the dead? And of course, Pamela, I'll preface it with that's an Ashkenazi tradition. We're Ashkenormative. In Sephardic, they name after people who are alive.
Right. Yeah, and and I'm not sure whether Shanti or Ocean or whatever some of those contemporary names are named after anybody anyway. So, some of this is obviously speculation. I like the movie. There was a Pixar movie that was based on the Day of the Dead, where as long as somebody remembers us, we're what was it called? I'm trying to remember.
I'll find it. But the Pixar movie from this year, Soul, really talks about coming back. Coco. Thank you, Maddie.
Coco, that was the one. That was the one. Right. So as long as beings remember us on the other side. Look, I think the question is, who do you imagine being there for you at when your time comes? I think that's really the way I like to hold that.
We can't thank you enough. Thank you, everybody. Next week, we have Professor Dr. Mark Berkson, and he's going to be talking about religion and violence. So you're going to want to come back next Sunday. Rabbi Dr. Raphael, we can't thank you enough. We're so fortunate and so glad you were with us this morning. And I'll see everybody during the week. Be well.
Thank you very much. Wonderful.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
all.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great presentation.
Thank
Thanks so much
you.
for coming.
Awesome.